What's up, y'all? How you doing? Welcome back to the channel. Been a little while since I posted a video, but things have just gotten really hectic lately. Of course, we've all been busy with the holidays. We had Thanksgiving yesterday, and also there's a lot of stuff going on behind the scenes. There's a lot of good stuff going on the training side of things, and a lot of good news for the company that I'm trying to build. Stay tuned for updates on that later. Now, this is a video that I've been wanting to make for quite a while, because believe it or not, it's almost been 2 months. Well, yeah, actually almost 2 months now, hard to believe. But it's been almost 2 months since we saw one of the worst atrocities of the 21st century take place. Some would argue it's the worst terrorist attack since 9/11. Now, of course, I am talking about the October 7th attack in which Hamas invaded southern Israel and massacred, I think it's up to between 12 and 1,300 people at this point, and kidnapped 220. Now, as horrible as this is, I remember I was glued to my phone, I was glued to my computer trying to keep up with all the news as it came in, because I really keep my nose to the grindstone when it comes to that stuff, especially on this kind of subject. But I kept watching all the reports come in, and then I just poured over all the news reports, over all the stories, over all the videos and anecdotes that came out in the days and weeks after the attack actually occurred. And one thing kept popping into my head, and it has been there ever since. As terrible as that day was, as horrible as what those unmentionable pieces of human excrement did to those poor people, I have never in my life seen a better example of why the Second Amendment is necessary, and why each and every citizen of, yes, the United States, but also any nation that considers itself free, why each and every citizen of every nation on earth should not only be armed, but should be well trained and willing to use those weapons for the defense of themselves and of their community. Because, guys, this is something that actually I dropped the ball on too, because I always thought Israel had much freer gun laws than they do. Come to find out, less than 3% of the Israeli population actually owns a firearm, because they actually have surprisingly restrictive gun laws. You're only allowed one firearm. You're only allowed so many rounds of ammunition. I think it was 50, but now they've upped it to 100. You have to be a legally licensed person in order to even own a firearm. And even though the IDF requires 2 years of service from every Israeli citizen, and once you reach the age of 18, I believe it's 18, you are required to give minimum 2 years service in the Israeli Defense Force. But despite that, they still have training requirements for civilian gun ownership. Now, since this attack has happened, they've actually loosened those gun laws. A lot of people, actually, I think I read somewhere there was such an overwhelming pour of requests for gun licenses that they have stopped requiring the training requirement. They are just handing these licenses out as fast as they can. Like I said, they upped the ammunition allotment from 50 rounds per person to, I believe, 100 rounds per person. Somebody correct me if I got that wrong. And they're actually trying to loosen the restrictions on how many guns you can have in the home at one time. Because, guys, what we saw on October the 7th was a textbook example of what happens when a murderous force of armed, evil men descends upon an unarmed population of peaceable people who, one, don't see the threat coming, and two, are completely unable to resist that attack. Now, yes, Israel has one of the best military infrastructures in the world. They have one of the most highly renowned militaries in the world for very good reason. And since it's a very small country, their reaction time is actually surprisingly fast. But despite that, it took hours for the Israeli military to mobilize, get in the fight, get down there and start kicking ass and kick Hamas back where they came from. Now, a big part of this was because October 7th was actually the end of a Jewish holiday. I looked this up and I struggled so hard to pronounce this. Somebody please correct me in the comments down below, but I'm not going to dishonor it by butchering it with my ignorance, so please forgive me there. But it was the last day of a Jewish holiday, I believe one of the biggest ones of the year, and I believe upwards of 60 to 70% of the Israeli military was actually on leave. Consider it as if somebody had attacked the United States during the 4th of July, when most of our military is on leave. So that's one reason why it took so long for Israeli military to actually get down there and take care of business. In fact, the base that they attacked right next to the, I forget what it was called, the music festival where close to 300 people were killed. The base that they attacked right next to that music festival, some have argued that they were actually on route to attack the base and they just happened upon the music festival, but whatever. That base was actually on a skeleton crew, and they were able to temporarily take control of that base before reinforcements came in and forced them back into the Gaza Strip. Now, that being said, their military is one of the best in the world. Their military infrastructure is one of the best in the world. They have the most battle-hardened soldiers in the world, except for maybe the United States. These people are under constant existential threat every day of the year. These people are under constant threat of annihilation because literally everyone else in their neighborhood wants to kill them. They are constantly under threat of invasion, of rocket attack, of bombardment, of terrorist attack, all these things. But even though they were that prepared, people were still killed. When Hamas poured across that border, when they pierced into those kibbutzim, into those small little communities where people were not allowed to have guns, and most of these people did not have guns, but these guys came in with AKs and rocket launchers and technicals and all this other military hardware, intent on committing mass murder, no one was there to stop them. No one could stand against them. No one was able to step up and say, "You will not harm my family. You will not harm my home. I will fight you and I will go down trying." No one was able to do that. And I have heard so many stories, so many wonderful stories of heroism. There was one, I forget the gentleman's name, I apologize, but I believe he was a grandfather and a former colonel in the IDF. He actually heard what was going on whenever he was in Tel Aviv, which is about an hour, hour and a half-ish drive from the area where this attack mainly took place. And when he heard about this, you know what he did? He called his daughter, who lived right on the Gaza border in one of these little kibbutzim. He called her up, and he said, "Don't worry, honey, I'm coming to get you." This is a man in his 60s. He is allowed one weapon. It was a pistol, a 9mm handgun from his time in the service. He was allowed 50 rounds. That's less than I go through in one range session, and even I'm trying to save ammo because it's expensive over here now. This guy loaded up a handgun, jumped into a car in his civvy clothes, didn't have any kit, didn't have any gear, and he drove into an active war zone to get his daughter back, to get his daughter and her family to safety. And while he was doing this, he stopped, I believe, 3 or 4 times to help other people get out of the kill zone, to help other people fleeing from that music festival, from other kibbutzim, from other little towns. He stopped to help them before going in and getting his daughter, and eventually he did. He got into a couple of gunfights and managed to take down a couple of the terrorists before he got his daughter out. And of course, there are other unfortunate stories of IDF soldiers who, being active duty, they had their weapons and their kit at their home, but they weren't attached to their regular units. So when they heard the gunfire, when they heard what was going on, they realized what was going on. I believe in one case, a woman was actually in her pajamas, and she grabbed her rifle and her kit, threw it on, ran outside, met up with a couple of citizens and a couple of other IDF members, and delayed the Hamas terrorists, and even was calling in airstrikes and air support and things of that nature, until the military was able to show up and force Hamas back into the Gaza Strip. And I believe... actually, I correct myself. I don't think this lady was killed, or she might have been. I've read so many stories, and it's been so long, it's hard to keep them straight. But there are many stories of heroism coming out of this area. Now, unfortunately, all this could have ended much, much differently. Because here in the United States, we have one of the freest cultures for gun ownership, despite what the Democrats and other political parties are trying to do to it. We have one of the freest nations in regards to gun ownership, the right to keep them, the right to train with them, the right to have them, the right to use them to defend ourselves and our communities. And a lot of people, especially in my neck of the woods, are just having a very hard time understanding how it was that Hamas was able to pierce the border, go into these little towns, which are not that different from the towns in my area. We have a lot of towns out here. They don't even have population signs. I mean, I can think of 3 or 4 towns just in my general area within like probably a 15-mile radius that probably have less than 50 people in them. There's one town just up the road that was on the show Dead Files. It's called Brumley, Missouri. Has a population of 91 people. My hometown, about 20 miles from here, I think there's maybe 150 people, if that. I'm probably highballing it there, but that's about what there is. So these little communities are not that much different from what you would see in southern Israel. And since we are in one of the freest states in the country, we're in Missouri after all, we're the state that tried to mandate that every citizen own an AR-15, but I digress. Since we are in such a free state, it is very, very difficult for people in my area to understand how this was able to happen and why so many people were killed and they were not able to fight back. Also, a lot of people in this country apparently are unable to understand that this was a horrible, horrible thing to happen to Israel, but in the context of being an Israeli, as being in that area, it's actually much worse than you think because their population is far smaller than ours. We have a population of, I believe, 350, 340 million people-ish here in the United States. Israel has a population of about 6 million. So losing almost 1,500 people, that is catastrophic. That is an unbelievable amount of casualties. And knowing that they could have been able to defend themselves only makes it worse. And to help you understand, I want to put this into context a little bit. So, how could we compare something like what happened on October the 7th to what would happen in the United States? Well, I give you this example. I used to live in southern Arizona. I actually lived in Tombstone, Arizona for a couple of years, and I lived in the border region down there. One of the big topics of conversation down there was always the cartel, even way back then. This has been 12, 15 years ago. Now today, they're also a big concern because Mexico has been fighting a de facto civil war against the cartels with literal military engagements with helicopters, armor, regular infantry, all these things. They've been fighting that civil war for several years against the cartels because the cartels effectively control northern Mexico. The cartels are not that different from Hamas, rather. Because if they really wanted to, they could do what Hamas did and worse 100 times over. So let's take an area of southern Arizona. Let's say Hereford, Sierra Vista, Tombstone, Nogales, some of these towns that are either right on or very close to the Mexican border. Now, I know that people down there are armed. I lived there for a couple of years. But let's just say, for the sake of argument, that they're not. And let's say that one day there's a Taylor Swift concert outside of Sierra Vista, which is attached to Fort Huachuca. Let's say it's the 4th of July weekend. Big proportion of the military forces in that area are out on weekend leave. Let's say Fort Huachuca is down to about a quarter strength. And all the weapons are locked up. The only people that are armed are the MPs, and even them, they only have their 9mm sidearms. Very few men are out training, so not a lot of guys are actually combat ready at this point. And all of a sudden, you start hearing explosions. You start hearing the rumble of vehicles off in the distance. You see these funny little black dots drifting down through the sky. And at first you think, wow, that's one hell of a fireworks display. I hope they're safe out there, they don't start any fires. But then it gets louder. It gets closer. Those black dots in the sky, they start taking form. At first you thought they were birds or something, but now they're starting to look an awful lot like human beings. And then as they get closer, you notice they have sails. And they're getting closer, and they're getting closer. Let's say you're in the back of the crowd at that Taylor Swift concert. You can barely hear anything, barely hear yourself think. And, the openers are doing their gig. You're waiting for her to come out. You're waiting for the big party to really start. All of a sudden, you see these sails, these gliders coming down. And as they touch down, you notice men with masks. They're wearing body armor. They have guns across their chests. Some of them are carrying PKMs and rocket-propelled grenades. Every one of them is loaded to the teeth with some kind of hardware. They have sidearms on they have pistols on their hips. They're carrying AK-47s with all kinds of accoutrements on there. Some of them have tricked out M4s, and you wonder where the hell did they get those. Some of them have anti-tank weapons. And off in the distance, you hear the rumble of V6 engines, and all of a sudden you see a bunch of white Toyota Hiluxes with 12.7mm or 50 caliber machine guns mounted on top of them, and they're coming straight for you. And all of a sudden, somebody gives a shout in Spanish. They all raise their weapons, say something like "Viva la cartel" or something along those lines, and they start unloading into the crowd. Guns start going off. It's automatic fire. People are falling. You can smell the acrid smell of gun smoke in the air. You hear people screaming. You see people on the ground. You can smell blood in the air. All you can do is run. You try to run away. You turn into the crowd because it's the worst thing you can possibly do. The guns are going off. More people are going down. People are screaming. Women are screaming. Men are telling their girlfriends, get down, get down, get down, I'll help you. And they're tackling people to the ground saying, don't worry, I'll save you. And they're grabbing people and pulling them into the exit saying, come on, this way, move, move. Security guards are running past you with their sidearms drawn. You hear 9mm starting to go off amidst the rifle fire, but then they go silent. You turn around and see those guards go down because there was absolutely nothing they could do against this onslaught. Maybe you're one of the lucky ones. You managed to make it to the nearest exit. You run out into the parking lot. You're trying to find your car. You're hitting that fob like there's no tomorrow, trying to find your car. And all of a sudden, pickup trucks pull into the parking lot, aim those machine guns at you, and they start firing. Now, a couple miles away outside of town, a convoy of those same pickups, maybe a couple armored vehicles. The cartel actually has armored personnel carriers and infantry fighting vehicles. They're coming up the road. Say they're coming up I-10. They roll into Tombstone. They roll into Hereford. They roll into the outskirts of Sierra Vista. And they are just mowing down anyone they can find. Every car that you see is full of bullet holes. You see minivans with families on their way to family barbecues or a fireworks display, something along those lines. And they have been absolutely decimated. There are vehicles on fire. People are screaming. These guys are laughing. They are just having a grand old time. They're screaming, they're cursing, they're shooting up in the air. They are celebrating for what they've done. Maybe you live in one of these tiny little farming communities, maybe outside Tombstone, or maybe you're in Hereford, or one of these other tiny little communities or little ranch complexes out in the middle of nowhere. People are kicking in your door. These guys are charging in and mowing down whole families as they sit at the dinner table. They're tossing grenades into basements where families are huddled, hoping that the police or the military or someone will come to save them. But no one's coming. These guys walk up to porta potties at this concert and just fill them full of holes, turn them into Swiss cheese. These guys walk into bedrooms and they find the wives and the daughters and the children of those ranchers, of those workers, of those families. And I'm not going to get into what they're doing to them because that will get me banned off this platform if what I've already said hasn't already done it. And all of this while people are screaming and pleading and hoping that someone who is in authority is able to come and save them. They're hoping the police will show up. Now, out there, if you live out in the boonies, you're outside of town, it's kind of like living out here, actually. If you are lucky, if you are hopeful, and you have one of the best apartments around, you're looking at about 20 minutes. If you're able to whip that phone out, call them and say, help me, help me, help me, this is happening, minimum 20 minutes. Now, with this kind of mass hysteria, people are going to be rushing to get out of town. They're rushing to get out of that concert. They're fleeing Sierra Vista. They're trying to get anywhere but there. The roads are choked. There is no way to get through. They're violating traffic laws and they're swerving over into oncoming traffic. Just anything to get them out of this area. The police can't get to you. You think, well, the army base is right over here in Fort Huachuca. It's just the other side of Sierra Vista. Surely they will come help. Well, unfortunately, they're down to quarter strength. And the cartel has moved into that base as well. And there is now a running gunfight going on in the office buildings of Fort Huachuca, and the army is losing. Because most of their soldiers are out on leave. It's the big holiday. Nobody's there. Nobody was able to get to their weapons because they're all kept under lock and key. No one's coming to help. They're just trying to survive. This goes on for hours. Hours. 12, 13 hours. And finally, if you're one of the lucky ones, you start hearing jets overhead. You start hearing helicopters flying over your property. You look outside because you found that one window that doesn't have bullet holes in it, that one place where you can safely look outside, and maybe you can see something. And you see tanks. You see Humvees. You see American flags. And you think, finally, I'm saved. And they roll right past you because they have bigger fish to fry. The men that have done this to you and your family and your friends, they're gone. They've already left. They've done what they came here to do. But they didn't go alone. Say you're at one of these ranch complexes and your whole family is gone. And you realize that among the fallen, your mother's not here. Your grandmother is not here. Your two daughters, who it was supposed to be their 6th birthdays or their 12th birthdays. They're very young. Your sweet little girls are not here. They've been taken. Maybe you saw them being taken away. Maybe you were at this concert and you saw your friend or your girlfriend, someone you love, being snatched up, had God knows what done to them. Then they were thrown in the back of a pickup truck or thrown onto a motorbike, and they're gone. They're over the border. You think you may never see them again because you saw the look in those men's eyes when they took those people away. And you know in your heart of hearts that they're gone. You're never going to see them again. And by now, hopefully the counterattack has started. This is about the timeline it was in Israel. And by the time that the enemy has been pushed back over their border, the damage is done. let's say when the smoke is cleared, let's amplify this to put in more of a proportional or a more representative, number for the situation that I've described. Taylor Swift concert, and there's a couple venues out there that could hold upwards of 10, 15,000 people. Let's say 1,000 people are dead at that concert, just that concert. Say at all these towns, all these little ranches out in the middle of nowhere, all these little communities that could not defend themselves. A month later, they're still trying to decide how many did we actually lose, because some of these places have been burned to a crisp. Some of these bodies have been burned. Horrible things have been done to these people. Things that I cannot describe and I wouldn't want to, but if you watch some of the videos out of Israel, unfortunately you will see all the ferocity that these people visited upon those people. It took a month to accurately figure out exactly how many people died, because it was that difficult to identify some of the remains. And all of this because people were not able to defend themselves. They were not able to fight back. Now, since I've severely dampened your holiday spirit at this point, I'm sure, I offer you a different situation. Something a little more accurate to probably what would actually happen in that area. And I know it fairly well because, again, I lived in that area. In fact, it's one of the places where I acquired my love of firearms and my love of firearms training. Let's say that this same thing happened. You're at that Taylor Swift concert, you're at your family ranch, you're in Sierra Vista, you're out in the town with your friends. Same exact situation. 4th of July weekend. Let's say the army post is still down at quarter strength, all the soldiers are on leave, maybe they're in the local area, maybe they flew home, whatever. Again, same exact scenario. Same thing happens. Those gliders come in, those convoys come over the border, you start hearing that gunfire down on the border, and all of a sudden this invading force comes rolling in. Those gliders touch down at that concert. You're one of the people that first sees them. Again, you're in the back of the crowd. You have a perfect view of these guys touching down. They're raising their weapons and they're getting ready to unload on this crowd. But this time, you don't run and scream. This time, you reach into your waistband, you lift your shirt, and pull out your Glock 19 mounted with a red dot and a flashlight. In your belt, you have two 19-round magazines, rather. And without even thinking about it, because you've been trained so well and you've trained so hard for this kind of situation, you present that weapon, you start firing, and you drop one of those paragliders. Somewhere behind you, you hear more gunfire. And just with the slightest glance, because you're still engaged, you are in the fight, you are lighting these guys up, they're shooting back at you, all hell has officially broken loose. But you just offer a quick glance. Just a cursory glance. And out of the corner of your eye, you see 5, 6, 10, 12 other people rushing out of the crowd as everyone else runs to safety. And they're all doing the exact same thing. Guns are drawn. Shots are being fired. Terrorists are going down. Good guys are going down. But there is a gunfight going on right now. All of a sudden, these guys realize they've bitten off way more than they can chew. And yes, they're wearing body armor. Yes, they have superior firepower. But these people are fighting back. They did not expect this. They thought this would be a cakewalk. They thought this would be like Israel, like the first scenario that I laid out. They thought this would be easy. But now they're losing men. Now they're getting hurt. They're getting wounded. They're expending ammunition. And they are being forced to take cover, even though they're dropping some of the good guys. Maybe they hit you. Maybe you have gone down and you are wounded. But all these other people, plus the security detail, plus anyone else in the area that is armed, maybe a couple of people actually managed to get to their cars, retrieve their car gear. So now maybe you've got guys with body armor. Maybe the good guys have rifles, or AR pistols, pistol caliber carbines, shotguns, hunting rifles. You would not believe the stuff people keep in their cars out there and out here. But let's say some of those people have gotten their gear and they came back to help you. Now it's an even fight. Now there is a gunfight going on in this area, and even though the good guys may lose this fight, the bad guys are going to pay for it. Time has been bought for everyone else to get out of this venue, to get to their vehicles, and to leave. And also out in the parking lot. Remember I said those trucks came rushing in and no one was able to stop them, and they just mowed down the whole crowd just like they did in Israel? Those guys that ran back to their cars, They're pulling out their plate carriers, they're pulling out chest rigs, they're pulling out ARs, AKs, shotguns, fully tacked out pistols, maybe a Mini 14 with some coyote rounds in there, whatever. People are grabbing weapons and they are getting ready to go back into that venue and throw down. But here comes those cartel trucks into the parking lot. They think they're walking into a cakewalk. They think this is going to be a turkey shoot. But all of a sudden, they start getting rifle fire from behind these vehicles. Targeted, effective, accurate rifle fire. Gunners are going down. Drivers are going down. Guys are hopping out of trucks trying to figure out where's it coming from, where's it coming from, and then they catch one in the head, they go down. They drove right into a fatal funnel. Now they have to turn around, they have to leave, otherwise, they are going to take significant losses, and that's not what they came here for. The tide has been turned. Just because armed citizens decided to carry that day. Let's go out into the small towns. Tombstone. On any given day, at least 50% of the population of Tombstone, and about 1,600 people live there, is carrying a gun. Whether it's the cowboy actors that I used to hang out with, whether it's the simple citizens, whether it's the ranchers who came in for just a day on the town and they got their deer rifles or their varmint rifles in the car. A lot of guys out there pack heat just for car gear. They'll have plate carriers and ARs, as like I said a minute ago. A lot of people are armed. Maybe they roll into Tombstone and try to do exactly what they did in the first scenario, but now they find themselves in running gunfights down every street. Now they find themselves in fatal funnels. There's guys up on their roofs that are picking them off. There's guys in every storefront. You've got everybody from the John Wayne impersonator down the street fanning off rounds with his .45 long Colt, to the marshal over here on the corner unloading with a 30-round AR with all the bells and whistles you can think of. And now everybody is coming in. Everybody's going home to grab their stuff, and they're coming back, or they're grabbing it out of their vehicle, whatever the case may be. But now they're lighting these guys up. These guys did not come here for a fight. They came here for a turkey shoot, and that's not what they got. Back at Fort Huachuca, they tried to get into the base, but remember, they're bogged down in the gunfight in this little concert that they came to. Well, then they went into Sierra Vista, and oh boy, you talk about an armed population. I'm talking about everybody from the criminal gangbangers that every semi-large town has, to the armed citizens, to the home defense people, to the retired military and police, the off-duty military, then everybody out there owns guns. I mean, half the military guys out there have either cloned or borrowed some of their rifles from the service, so they have exactly the setup they would take into an actual combat situation sitting in their closet back at home. A lot of them have kit that they either use for actual training or they've bought themselves. So at a moment's notice, all these guys grab their stuff, run outside. Maybe they've trained together. If this is a military community, they have trained together. People are barking orders saying, you there, you there. Guys, come on, get those vehicles over there. We're going to set up right here. Here they come. Next thing you know, those cartel forces are rolling up and they are being unleashed hell upon. They have a hail of bullets coming down from every window, every roof, every street. They are being lit up because they chose to mess with the wrong town. Now, a lot of you guys are out there shaking your heads right now thinking that would never happen. Oh, you filthy civvies, you're not that well trained. Oh, nobody would actually walk into gunfire like that. Oh, the whole thing with the concert, nobody's going to come in to back you up. Nobody knows who's the good guys and who's the bad guys. Well, you're wrong, because this exact scenario is played out many times. Look at Elijah Dickin. Drew his firearm in the middle of an Indiana mall, dropped a mass shooter in his tracks before he could harm anyone else. Look at Jack Wilson. White Settlement, Texas. And the man came in with a shotgun, shot one parishioner. Jack Wilson, from I think it was 40 feet away, nailed him through the head, dropped him in his tracks. He actually had a security detail between... Jack Wilson's the one that got all the credit, but at that very church, I believe something between 16 and 20 parishioners were armed and had drawn their guns. This guy walked into a hornet's nest and he didn't even know it. Look at the example of Kyle Rittenhouse. I don't care what anybody says. That kid had training. He fought off 5 armed. One was armed with a skateboard, but 5 aggressive rioters, and came out on top. Why? Because he was well armed, he was well trained, he knew what he was doing, and he handled himself flawlessly. You look at any of these situations where good guys with guns have stood up, put themselves in the line of fire, and dropped whoever was offering a threat to the people that they loved or the people in their vicinity, and it worked. Everybody who says it can't happen or it wouldn't happen, you're lying to yourself. You're trying to put down other people that actually do train for this situation just because, oh, you were in the name that branch and you did the whatever, or you wore a badge for 3 years and you had equivalent training to your average CCW holder, so you're the man, whatever, whatever. Yes, blah, 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 bullshit, 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 whatever. This is exactly why the Second Amendment was written. Yes, there's the old argument that it was to stand up to tyranny. That was a key component, because what did the Founding Fathers just finish doing whenever they wrote the Constitution and they wrote the Second Amendment? They had just finished fighting off the most powerful monarchy on the face of the planet. In fact, the most powerful monarchy that had ever existed up to that point. They had just fought the most well-trained, the most well-armed, the most well-disciplined, bar none the best military on the planet, as a bunch of farmers with squirrel rifles and pitchforks, and they won. Why? Because every man was armed. Every man was skilled. Every man had been trained through the militia service, or the militia system back in those days. They had been trained and armed to fight off exactly that kind of threat. And at a moment's notice, somebody rang the bell, said, the regulars are coming, get your stuff, meet me on the green, we're going to face these guys down. Then it all kicked off. But also, not only was the Second Amendment designed to stand up to tyranny, it was also designed to prevent invasion, because back in the days when this was written, invasion was a constant threat, whether it be from the Native American tribes, from one of the myriad of empires that existed at that time. The British actually did invade us in 1812, and they paid for it then, but also the French, the Spanish, some of the South American nations were getting pretty powerful, although Spain still controlled most of it. And then there was Russia out to the west. People forget the Russian Empire was fairly aggressive back then, and they didn't really like this upstart little United States, thinking that they could, be the new kid on the block. A lot of people did not like us whenever we first formed. But they found out very quickly, one of the reasons that we were able to beat the British army is because every man was armed. In fact, in many cases, every woman was armed. If I had it my way, every single American citizen would own at least one firearm and be well trained in how to use it, even though maybe you don't really want to use it for this kind of situation. You should still be able to safely handle one. You should still have education. This is why we had hunter safety courses and why we had rifle classes in public schools up until about the 50s or 60s, maybe a little while after that. Some schools still have them. Biden tried to shut them down and he failed. You need to look no further than World War II, in fact, because the Japanese actually had a plan that after they hit Pearl Harbor, their plan was to invade the west coast of the United States. There's supposed to be 3 army groups. One was going to land in Portland, one was going to land in LA, one was going to land in San Diego. Their idea was they would take the west coast, and they probably would have, push as far inland as possible and force the United States to capitulate, force them into peace talks. But one man, this is credited to Admiral Yamamoto, the mastermind behind the Pearl Harbor attack, but no one really knows who said this, but we're fairly certain it was somebody in the Japanese high command. One man uttered that famous phrase, "You cannot invade the United States because there would be a rifle behind every blade of grass." They knew that even if the military couldn't push them back, because they were a very militaristic society, but private gun ownership really wasn't a thing. They still had very much the samurai code of conduct where only the nobles or only the warriors or only the military was allowed to have guns, and culturally that was the normal thing. But they understood, whoever it was that uttered that line, understood that in the United States, we have a culture of everybody is armed. Everybody knows how to use this. Everybody that lives out in the country or even on the outskirts, or anybody who has any inkling of gun culture in their life, has grown up shooting, has grown up hunting, has grown up training, and they were probably as well trained as the average Japanese soldier. And I'm speaking about American civilians here. They understood that even though our tactics might work, if we were just fighting the military, it might work. But you're forgetting that there are hundreds of thousands of Americans out there who would grab their rifles, go out, hit the hills, go into the mountains, fight us in the mountains, fight us in the valleys, fight us in the rivers, fight us on the roads, fight us in the cities. You would not be able to take one single solitary step without catching a bullet. And this is why we have the Second Amendment. This is exactly why we have the system in place that, aside from a few misguided states, every American citizen has the right, and nay, the necessity, to, if not be armed, at least be educated on proper firearms handling, proper firearms safety, the proper way to use a firearm if the need were ever to arise. In most states, I believe we're up to 28 right now, we have constitutional carry, where you can legally carry a firearm anywhere you please. Anywhere where you are legally allowed to be, as long as it's not a bank, a federal building, a hospital, a prohibited zone, or anywhere that is posted, rather. So as long as you don't hit one of the big five areas, you're able to legally, and of course, if you don't have a criminal record and you're above the legal age, which is either 18 or 21, depending on the state, you can legally have a concealed firearm. You can legally have a rifle in your car. Heck, in some states, this one included, I can strap an AR to my back, walk around all day like nobody's business, and yeah, I might get some dirty looks, and some cop may not like it, but legally, I'm fine. Nobody can say jack. As long as I'm not waving it around and threatening people, as long as it sits on that sling, as long as it sits in that holster, as long as I am a normal human being who just happens to be armed, nothing is out of the ordinary. Nothing's wrong. And if trouble were to arise, I would be able to use my weapon. Anyone else who's around could use their weapons. We could meet that threat head on, without waiting for the authorities, without waiting for the military. As horrible as the Israel attack was, it has never been clearer to me or my fellow gun enthusiasts why we need the Second Amendment. Because those threats are out there. The FBI themselves said in the wake of the October 7th attack, they are expecting Hamas-style attacks. And we pretty much know where those attacks might take place, because if they tried it here, they wouldn't get far. If they tried it in Arizona, they wouldn't get far. If they tried it in one of those 28 states where constitutional carry is legal, they would not get far. Guys, I hope I haven't ruined your mood for the day. I hope that this has been somewhat educational, and I hope that all of you out there, you stay armed, you stay vigilant, and stay frosty, my friends.